Hey guys, and welcome to another week of startup productivity and personal life. It's week 6 or 7, I'm not sure, but we'll just call it week 6. My name is Anton Januska. I am a developer and a writer, and I've been working at startups for the past almost 6 years now. This whole series, I guess to give a kind of a recap if you haven't watched any of the previous weeks, is about using startup productivity ideas and technologies and procedures in order to make yourself more productive in your personal life, keep up motivation, and basically get things done in general. And I guess let's get started. Kind of sucks that the bottom bar here is visible, but I guess full screen doesn't really mean full screen anymore. So let's try to do what we can with this. So tips and apps. Usually I have a ton of tips and I have a ton of apps, but I haven't really found anything in the past week other than the app called Scannable. Let me just go ahead and open that. Scannable is an app by Evernote, and what you can basically do is take a picture of a document, and it'll like resize it, deskew it, and whatever, change the colors, make it more contrasting, so that it kind of looks like it's been scanned by an actual scanner. And I found that actually really useful. I take notes in my notebook, in my Evernote notebook. You don't have to have an Evernote notebook. I just got it because I thought it would make it better, but honestly, you can pretty much scan anything from anywhere, and it works really, really well. I don't know. Alt back. Is that what it is? Okay. So that's pretty much it. I wish I had a little bit more tips, but I currently don't. I'll have a few things to talk about, obviously. This is not going to be an empty week. Let's talk about last week. So chapter 1 of my book is underway. I think I'm pretty much almost done with chapter 1. I did write one article and I posted it. I'm not going to post the link because it's a little bit... And I'm almost done with my second article, which I'm pretty excited about because it has to do with my retrospective on startup development and working as a lead developer at a startup for the past almost 2 years now. Open file, that sounds kind of random, but my Markdown Editor can now open files, and I can also list files and folders. I can list files and folders in my current directory, which is pretty cool too. So let's talk about writing. Chapter 1, let me tell you the summary real quick. Linnae tries to shoot Leon. Leon is an ambassador of sorts, a lesser ambassador that she was tasked to kill or to assassinate, and she fails. She has a clear shot and she doesn't want to take it because she's afraid of killing somebody around them, even though she has authorization to do so, and actually the mission itself stresses that she has to kill the ambassador no matter what the collateral damage is, except for a few small caveats. Master Yvonne kills him instead, and they travel back through the city to the Assassin's Guild, which is basically a huge library in the middle of a very poor district that has access to ancient underground tunnels. That's where the Assassin's Guild resides. And Linnae is placed in front of the council to justify her actions. I haven't gotten to that part yet in the book, but I'm pretty excited to basically introduce the concept of, it's okay if you screw up, it's okay if you fuck up, it's okay if you're not ready for this, it's not okay for you to consciously disobey. And that's going to be an interesting kind of thing that she's going to battle with, like, hey, you're at the top of your class, but because you disobeyed, you're pretty much worthless to us. While somebody who's less competent but can obey orders is much more useful. Here's my failure from last week. I've been having trouble tracking my words. I haven't really done it at all. I did it for a couple days and ended up kind of slipping and not doing it every day. And that kind of sucks. It actually really sucks because I think that it would be great to just kind of see the waving graph as I'm writing. And the more I write every day, the easier it is to write the next day. And so that's something that I just feel bad about. Several days I wasn't able to hit my 300 word mark, and that sucks because I could have just marked that in my word tracking to see, oh, hey, I fail here, but over time the failures are less frequent and so on. I've been having a whole lot of, it's been pretty difficult for me to focus and work on the book for a variety of, I guess, personal reasons. Some of the previous tasks that I had to do for writing, like coming up with names and whatever, I could kind of do in my head while I'm doing other things. So I'm washing dishes and I'm thinking to myself, Lene, what is her background story? Or Lene's aunt, what could her story be? And that's kind of easy, and that's easy to just kind of sit down and within 5 minutes just write down all the notes and be done with the task. But sitting down and finding time to actually write without being interrupted is difficult. It's really difficult. I'm finding it difficult to find time to record these videos, let alone having that time every day to write, consecutive time. But I'm gonna have to deal with that. And last thing is that plotting has its issues. I've always had issues with plots, and so here they are. Plotting can feel constricting. One of the problems that I've always seen with my plotted out books is that I would get through for several chapters, and I'm like, well, I'd like to go somewhere with this, but the plot says my pre-written plot says I have to go here, and I don't know if I want to go there anymore. I want to go somewhere else, and I just want to see where the story takes me. It almost feels like the plotting takes the creativity and fun out of the book. But I also know it's necessary. And I also know that I wouldn't have gotten to this level of quality of writing, or rather of story, if I had not done the plotting. The next thing is that plotting feels like you have to just get one from one dot to the next. So you're trying to get from one plot point to the next point, and in the middle it just feels like it's a filler. You have a plot point in my story where Lene fails to kill this guy, and the next plot point is she has to go in front of the council. What happens in the middle? Do I skip that and she's just at the council? Do I want to give her a walkthrough of the city? Does something happen while she's walking through the city? Well, I guess it shouldn't, because it's not in the plot, so it kind of sucks about that. But again, it's still necessary. I'm gonna work with it. I'm gonna battle with myself a little bit, and we'll see how it goes. Character naming. This is another kind of weird failure of mine. So secondary and tertiary characters, I don't have any names for them, and it's difficult to come up with names on the spot. I don't like using just regular names like what you would hear around the office. I want something that actually fits into the story, and my story has a specific feel to it, has specific naming conventions. And so every time I would encounter a character, I would think to myself, do I want to come up with a name for them? And then when I don't, it feels kind of empty, because it's like, well, there's a classmate, and it's like, well, shouldn't that classmate have a name? Oh, there's a council member. Shouldn't that council member have a name? So for now, I've just been using kind of placeholder names. I create angle brackets, and inside of it, I put a placeholder name with a random name. I'm keeping a reference sheet to what that name is and who that person is. So that I can do like a quick copy, where was it, like a find and replace throughout the entire project, and say like, okay, well, this person is going to be named this now officially. One thing I thought to myself is that I would love to create a name repository and a character repository. So before I had a kid last year, I created like a good list of names, and I used several of the names in this book. And I used the list was supposed to be for my daughter, but most of those names got thrown out immediately. So I was thinking to myself that it would be great to have a repository of names, especially names that are a little bit, maybe, for lack of a better word, non-white. Most of my characters in this book are not white, and I can't just give them white names, and it sucks, because like if you do, it feels like you're kind of betraying who they are. So I feel like it'd be great to have a name repository with kind of tags that tell you, here's where the ethnical heritage of this name is. Here are some alternative spellings if you want to have like a fantasy or like a sci-fi or whatever, and just have that on hand with meanings, so that you can kind of have that in there too. Also, having a character repository. This is something that I see a lot of people have for RPGs, tabletop RPGs. Tabletop, or I don't know what you would call it, but D&D and stuff like that, where people create characters, like pre-made characters, and then they have them appear in stories, and sometimes when they go play a completely different session, they still might use that character. If they're playing a completely different game, they might still use the character, because it's easy to go back and reference this character, and it's easy to build up a character and a repository of characters to use. Like, you have a grave robber, and just write down the backstory, write down their name, write down several alternative names of anything, their strengths, their weaknesses, blah, 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 and then you can get to reuse that character in a bunch of places. Now, I'm not really into reusing characters, but I think it's pretty useful to have a repository of characters just on hand where you need somebody right away. Hey, I need a pompous classmate, and you pull in somebody that you already know, you can tweak that character a little bit, and you're good to go. I think that would be great. just as a side note, so this part is that startup productivity. Talking about the failure, talking about where the difficult points were, talking about where I can improve. Doing this so that I don't stop for half an hour trying to come up with a name or a system. So what's next? I want to finish my article. The article is my article for my personal website. The reason I'm mentioning this is because writing is part of this productivity sprint, I guess, or whatever. And writing for the book and outside of the book helps a lot. I want to track a lot better. I think that's a big deal. I want to finish chapter 1 and go to chapter 2, and I definitely want to start preparing mentally for NaNoWriMo. And my own version. The reason I say that is because I'd like to get about 10,000 words in before NaNoWriMo. I know you're not supposed to. You're supposed to start from scratch, and so I'm going to be cheating just a little bit. So that I can end up with a 60,000 word script or draft at the end of November. We'll see how that goes. I think I currently have about 1,500 words, so it's not too bad. I mean, writing 9,000 words in the next 3 weeks, piece of cake, I guess. We'll see how that goes. I definitely don't want to fail on NaNoWriMo this year. Last year I was a week late with it, which I was really mad at. I'm like, oh my god, I have 4,000 words left and it's November 29th. This is not going to happen, and it didn't. But also I didn't have a lot of sleep just because my daughter wasn't sleeping well last year. Learn from your failures, right? So, let's talk about my Markdown editor, Omen. I really like Omen. I really like the name. I have, in my repository, I have changed the name from Omen to Open Markdown Environment Notebook, which does not make sense whatsoever. I don't like it. IPC. So IPC is the intra-process communication, which IPC communication is it's one of those when you say ATM machine, Anyway, so it wasn't difficult for the two processes to communicate. So if you followed some of my videos earlier, this was kind of my concern. How do you communicate between the Electron process and the rendering process? And this is something that Electron stresses. They're like, hey, we have these two processes, and there's a reason for it. There's a really good reason for it. You have to just have them communicate together. One of the cool things is that you can, I think, launch several rendering processes, which is great. It's kind of like opening several tabs. Anyway, so it wasn't difficult to create a communication system. I based it off of the HTTP spec, kinda-ish. I still need like a unique ID. I still need a unique ID creator. I think that would make it a little bit easier. But basically the system is right now is that you can fire off one-off messages, and what you basically do is you send a message out with a specific message that says like, get all my files, and you might attach a unique ID to that, and when you get that message back from the system sends it back as a message saying, responding to getting all files, and it sends that unique ID back as an argument. And if the unique ID matches, that initial event listener gets removed. The reason for that is so that you don't end up with a bunch of zombie event listeners, because sometimes you just need to do a one-off, get me a message, get me this, get me that. I'm going to restructure it a little bit. It's because what's interesting is that the Redux Electron, the IPC and Redux, it works really well together, because if you think about it, your action to get a file with a certain ID can go directly into Electron for Electron to fetch that file. And when it responds, Redux can just catch that message, and instead of it going through another third middleware or whatever, Redux can catch that message and just update what's going on without having to worry about anything else. Next thing is Electron. So I have a file listing. So when I open it, I have like a file listing on the left that tells you all the different files. Whenever you click on a file, it opens the file. If it's a folder, it doesn't do anything. I created an Angular IPC wrapper, and you can't directly use this as a web app anymore. So one thing that people said that is like, oh, you can wrap your web app into Electron, it works. It doesn't. When you add IPC, you can't use it. IPC is an Electron-only thing. It does not work on the web, and it'll break, and you'll have to figure out a way around it. And after listening to a recent talk by Slack about Electron, they basically said that, oh, this is what people think you can do, but you can't. You can create components that can be reusable across several systems, but you can't just say, I'm going to wrap my web app in Electron. That just doesn't work. And it creates problems. I left a slide blank for some reason. I guess I didn't really have anything else to talk about. So what's next? So I definitely want to do project path update. What I want to be able to do is just copy and paste a project path into the Omen editor, and it'll give you a brand new file listing with brand new files. I want to have permanent file listeners. So this was the permanent listeners. This is the thing that I talked about where Redux can just like listen and take in whatever message comes in and do whatever it needs to be with it. Get current file, that gets sent to Electron. Electron returns it. Instead of it going through a middle person callback, which is what the architecture is right now, it just goes directly to Redux, and Redux sees, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. Definitely want to do a save file. That's almost there. And I want to drop in code mirror finally. Even if I'm not going to be able to customize it much, I just want to drop it in because I think that'll make a difference. And tests, I want to start on using tests. That's a scary part. So last week, or for the past few weeks, I had this section of the video where I talked about productivity. Today I wanted to talk about retrospective instead. I think that'll be a little bit better. So with writing, so it's been great. In the past 6 weeks, I've been able to go from nothing, no idea, no intention to, no idea about what story I was going to write, no characters, nothing at all, no knowledge of how to write YA, to writing my first chapters. That's big. I learned a lot about YA, and here's a few writing tips that I've come across. It has to have a story. I know it sounds kind of stupid, but I wrote several books, and thinking back, I'm like, there's not really a story. One of the things that I've noticed in my writing is that if I write a book or if I write a story, I often get to a point where I'm like, so hold on a second, like, how do I summarize this to somebody? How do I tell what this book is about? And if I can't summarize it within a sentence or two, it doesn't really have a story. Like, I have a story of a guy that loses his parents, and he gets sent to an orphanage, and he gets adopted by an alien, goes off to an alien school, and then he leaves the alien school. What's the story? There really isn't one. It's my favorite book that I've written, but there really isn't a story. And it's really hard to look at it back now because I'm like, well, I wrote this 8 years ago, but here are the issues with it. And it's actually pretty good that I know this. There's no just because. You can't just throw something into the story because you feel like it. It has to have a reason there, and that has been my failure in the past as well. Compelling stories are hard to write and figure out, and this goes into why plotting is necessary. At least for me, at least why I feel like it's necessary. You have to kind of figure out the plot. You have to write it down. You have to create a story. Even if you're gonna alter it and change it and kind of go through the first draft and you're like, man, I gotta rewrite this entire book, that's totally okay. You just gotta figure out the story first. And young adult is definitely not easier than any other genre. I just want to mention that. Seriously. It's pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult just jamming all these, being aware of all these different themes that are associated with YA and making them work for you. Omen. So there's definitely lots of space for good writing editor. There's a brand new writing editor coming out like every few months that I see, like one that gets pretty popular, and they all try to solve a different problem, and nobody's there yet. Nobody's there at the point where you're like, man, this fucking works. And the same thing goes with code editors. So as a programmer, I use VS Code. You can see it in my bottom pane on the bottom left over here. I don't want to hover over it for too long. I don't want to get the preview. I use VS Code for, it's an insider edition, that's why it's green if you guys are used to blue. I use it, and I think it's one of the best editors, but I also switch between that, Vim, and Emacs. So there's just so many good code editors by themselves, and there's so many good writing editors, and everybody tries to solve a different problem. So there's definitely lots of space for making a good editor and improving on it. Next thing is Angular 2 is pretty awesome. It's not too difficult to set up. Like, once you get the setup and you understand why it works the way it is, it's not too difficult to write more code and figure shit out. I know that one thing that I was really apprehensive about is that I would get stuck trying to figure out the Angular 2 way of doing things. And I'm not getting into that because it doesn't feel like there's an Angular 2 way. There's just your code and how you write your code, you write what you want to do, and you figure out which section, which like little cubicle inside of Angular 2 it fits in. So I want to write an IPC messaging service. That's great, it goes into a service. Done. You don't have to do anything. And my IPC messaging service will have to utilize Redux, and you don't have to think about how you're going to implement that. You just drop it in as a dependency. All done. The next thing that I realized is that Electron is amazing. especially with that IPC stuff, just knowing that this is one of the things you can do. But a lot of the work that's being done in the Electron space, a lot of the stuff you can do with it, it's really awesome. Like, it feels like you're writing a web app on steroids, but it also feels like you're writing a desktop app that is pretty easy to write. So, and the last thing I wanted to mention is that new technology is not scary. A lot of the times it's really scary to just jump into something new. You hear about all this new, latest hot tech. There's CycleJS, MobX, and Xstream, and RxJS, and lots of X's. Elm and all this, and it's really not that scary jumping into it. As long as you have like a good solid hour to look through the documentation and build a kind of a basic app, it's not too bad. I was really, like I said, scared about Angular 2, but now I'm kind of okay with it. I was scared about Electron, now I'm okay with it. So I think that's something that I want to encourage myself more to do. It's okay to try out new technologies. It's okay to say, I don't know anything about MobX, I don't think I'm going to have to use it for anything. Why don't I just try out a simple project just for the fuck of it? I think that's like a really cool thing that I kind of realized. That's it. I would say see you next week, but I want to go over a few things that I wanted to bring up that I didn't write slides for. One of them is that last week I wasn't able to get all the stuff I wanted to do done. That means that my average went down. I got, I think, 20 out of 24 points. My velocity went down to an average of 14 or 15, something like that, which is crazy low, and I didn't realize it was going to be this low. I'm like, well, it's 24, I only got 20, so it should be 20, right? But for some reason I calculated 14 or 15 to be my my velocity, and I think it calculates like the last like 5 or 6 weeks, and I think that first week where I got like 30 points because I did so much like grunt work is not in the average anymore, so my average dropped really low. So I'm hoping to make that up next week. That's one thing I wanted to mention. Another thing I wanted to mention was, and that's in terms of the retrospective. There has been a lot of cool apps that I found out about. I think this specific app that I'm using for the presentation is really awesome. I'm so glad I found it. I found a few cool writing editors. I started using PenFlip again, which is something I didn't do, and I got really involved in the writing community, which is something I've been wanting to do for several years now, and I found it really difficult. And now, because of Slack and because of this project, I'm talking to writers as much as I talk to developers, and it's amazing. I'd like to continue that trend. But yeah, this is my like 6-week retrospective. I think I said in the first video that I wanted to finish this sprint by the end of October. We'll see. I mean, I'm going to be doing NaNoWriMo after that, so I'll probably do weekly updates for NaNoWriMo or writing only. I might do a little bit of work on an Omen, but actually I'd like to have Omen in such a place where I can use it to write NaNoWriMo. That would be amazing. That would be amazing. We'll see. But until next week, I guess see you guys. Thank you for watching and listening. Oh, one more thing. One more thing I wanted to mention is that I should probably invest some time into learning how to do video editing, because that would be pretty cool.